Charming and enchanting when you first meet them, but are ultimately shallow and have few meaningful, long-lasting relationships. They crave money and power and are willing to sabotage, intimidate, manipulate, steal, defame, lie and cheat shamelessly without guilt. Throughout ancient history, more specifically, cultures have identified this kind of thing that we now call psychopaths. They used to be called archons. The Native Americans called them serpent spirits, and they were capable of taking possession of people's bodies and minds. And what's so funny is that the modern definition of psychopathy and all the desires and the things that they actually want from people is exactly, almost identical to what the ancient cultures describe as either demons or dark gods or something of that nature. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get away with things if you simply deny doing them. You know, that's often all that people need. Roughly 30% of people will believe everything that they're told without needing any evidence. And about 30% of people will need a bit of evidence. And incidentally, that's the 30% that don't vote. So you've got about 70% of people who are complete idiots who continue to vote for people who are committing scumbaggery and deny that they're committing scumbaggery. When you're talking about the psychopathic condition, they actually believe their own lies, and it's been shown in studies with lie detector tests that psychopaths do not actually give off those signals. Sweaty palms, increased heart rate, movement of the eyes from side to side. These are things that ordinary people who have things like empathy, creativity, we can't hide those things without significant amounts of training. This is why cult leaders are particularly powerful. They seem to be able to not only lie to people, but lie to them so convincingly that they will love being lied to, and they will give up the things that they value most in their life, including their family, their wealth, and their resources, in order to become part of a cult. Now, that's an extreme example, but the exact same symptoms of psychopathy that you would see in any kind of religious crazed cult, you can see the exact same kind of pattern forming within politics and politicians.
I was part of the team that was putting together the resources that were used to fight deal with the oil fires in Kuwait in 1991. But that was a very significant trigger for me in absolutely acknowledging that the way the world actually functioned was not as most people comprehend. Schlumberger was working in both Iraq and Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. I mean, Schlumberger prided itself in not being tied to a nation state. It was a truly transnational corporation. And so the fact that there were two nation states knocking 7 barrels of hell out of each other, well, you know, it wasn't really our concern, was it? I mean, our concern was effectively providing the needs for the client company working in those countries. And today I would sort of consider that to be a sort of borderline cognitive dissonance. You know, literally burying your head in the sand to the reality of what's going on around you.
Did you do that as well?
Yes. And in fact, I used to half jest when I was recruiting people to work in the industry, and I made the observation that if you have any interest in geopolitics, then this is not the industry for you.
Oh.
You know, you literally had to put the blinkers on and just get on with the job. When you've got a very healthy salary check coming into the bank every month, which is keeping you and your family in a lifestyle to which they've become accustomed, then it would seem that shutting yourself off from that reality is a small price to pay. But in reality, it's a very big price to pay, because, you know, really you are effectively part of the problem. You are effectively culpable in what is unfolding. The bubble was burst, if you like, when I was traveling around the southern oil fields with a military driver and some other colleagues from other companies, and we were looking at the logistics that we were going to need to bring to bear to be able to deal with this unprecedented firestorm. I mean, it was 620 odd wells, I think it was, that were out of control. What I saw was obviously a lot of burning wells, but in foxholes around the wells were young Iraqi conscripts with bullet holes in the backs of their neck. My observation was that, hang on a second, we're supposed to believe that these guys set wells alight and then jumped back in the foxholes and shot themselves in the back of the neck. It doesn't make sense. So I happened to sort of think out loud and said, this is outrageous. Clearly something else happened here. And a couple of days later, I had a visit from a US military personnel with no markings on his fatigues, and he came up to me in the mess of the Kuwaiti Oil Company's offices in Al-Kamadi, and he knew who I was. He walked straight over to me and he said, "You're Ian Crane?" And I didn't say anything. He said, "I've been hearing you've been casting some aspersion about who set them wells alight." And I still didn't say anything. And he said, "Boy," he said, "that's the kind of thinking that can get you in a whole lot of trouble, and you best be keeping your mouth shut." What I had seen led me to believe that the fires had been started by US Special Forces. And of course people's immediate reaction is, well, why would they do that? What would they have to gain from that? Well, actually it worked perfectly, because the whole objective was to demonize Saddam Hussein and Iraq in the eyes of the rest of the world. And the reason was twofold. Number one was to keep Iraqi oil off of the global market, because Iraq was not part of OPEC, and the concern was that Saddam would drop the price of oil and effectively undermine the whole global energy market. And the other part of it was that Iraq was outside of the central banking system. The Rothschilds controlled central banking system, and they wanted to force Iraq into the system. And of course Saddam kept Iraq out of the central banking system right through until 2003, when Bush and Blair launched their illegal war on Iraq.
Name me a bureaucrat that is really creative and totally changing everything all the time. They don't exist.
Well, and if they did, they were killed, wouldn't they?
Either that or they just don't get promoted through the ranks.
Right, yeah.
One of the things throughout history that you see that has been akin to the rule of psychopaths, whether that be crazy Roman emperors or domineering royalties and things of that nature, which have gone nuts all throughout history. History is just this long list of psychos getting control of massive empires and then imposing hierarchical structures so that everybody has to follow all these stupid rules the whole way down, and so that nobody even questions the rules that they have to follow, and they go out and follow the orders of a psychopath who didn't even come up with the orders himself because he's not that creative, and people wonder why the world is crazy. And imagine for a moment that I told you the world is run by crazy people. Does it suddenly make a lot of sense why the world seems so crazy? Yeah.
And it gave me the opportunity to have a unique insight into the corporate control of the US and the way in which the corporatocracy has the nation in an absolute stranglehold.
What psychopaths are really, really good at, even on the understandings of modern psychology, is knowing exactly what you desire, exactly what you want. First meet you, and I'm going to tell you this, that, and the other, and everything's going to be so wonderful, and you're never going to have to worry about it. I'm going to make all your dreams come true. They gotcha.
Those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom, their definition of sustainability is sustaining their global dominion.
So essentially what's happening here at the moment is governments are telling us what to do through corporate-controlled media, and corporate-controlled media is telling us what to do through governments. It's a vicious cycle where there's a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid there's a few people saying, hey, this is what's going on. By the time you get to the bottom, you've got all these people that are running around like headless chickens not knowing what to do. So if you turn off your TV and stop listening to corporate media and start critically thinking about everything that you read, then you're going to start stepping into the right process.
And this is why hierarchical structures are really, really handy if you're a psychopathic scumbag. Because, hey, if anybody threatens your dominance, you have X amount of layers that you have to go through in order to get to whoever's at the top.
Everything that we see unfolding right now is actually very well documented in a document that goes way back beyond 2000. It was actually published in 1932. And it's a document that's called Technocracy Inc., the earliest version that I have found of the blueprint of everything that's unfolding now to keep humanity literally locked into a total control grid. Zbigniew Brzezinski actually picked up on Technocracy Inc. Now, I don't know exactly at what point, but certainly by 1969. And I think his trigger was a report that came into the public domain in 1967, which was called the Report from Iron Mountain. Now, we don't know the exact origins of this Report from Iron Mountain. We don't know who participated in it. Some people dismiss it as a forgery. Well, let me tell you, it was a pretty damn good forgery if it was a forgery. But it was presented as a think tank document, and the think tank were tasked with looking at ways to control large populations without having a threat of thermonuclear war hanging over them. And so this think tank was put together in 1963 in the immediate aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this is the first reference, by the way, that I can find to things like global warming, climate change, drought, famine, all of which can be used as tools to control a population as an alternative to fear of thermonuclear war.
Again, fear.
If you want somebody to abandon their reasoning processes, to abandon their conscience, make them feel afraid.
Yeah.
On the physical plane, they're doing a very, very good job of actuating their Depop agenda, aren't they? Depop agenda is depopulation agenda, which is called for, prescribed, and strategized for, and has been for a long, long time.
Doesn't bother me.
I don't really mind as long as it's like for safety reasons.
If it's for a good cause, then it's all right.
I don't like it. I enjoy my privacy. Ooh.
It doesn't bother me.
Oh, I think it's necessary.
I'm not really too keen on the whole idea.
We should have our own private life, and we shouldn't have people intervening at every step of the way.
I think there unfortunately are people out there perhaps who need to be monitored for the rest of our good.
Fuck no, it's bullshit.
What New Zealand is doing, together with the other Five Eyes nations, is to attempt to create a new structure of civilization. And I don't think that New Zealanders agreed to take part in such a radical, extremist project of putting all the foreign, at least, telecommunications of New Zealanders under a mass surveillance regime which automatically collects information on every single person. I think that is an extreme, bizarre, Orwellian future that has been constructed secretly. We shouldn't look at the Five Eyes and the activities of the National Security Agency in isolation. This is part of a broader hegemonic agenda by these institutions, not by the United States, but by these institutions that operate in an anti-democratic way and the networks of power associated with them. Coupled together with mass surveillance is an extraterritorial move to apply certain aspects of US law to as many countries as possible. So, for example, why am I being investigated by a grand jury in the United States now for the past 4.5 years, and some of my staff as well? How is that possible? I'm not an American citizen. We don't have a company registration in the United States. Well, because we publish US government documents, and that is the claim jurisdictionality, which these groups operating out of Washington are going to apply coercive force to me and my staff and the rest of the world.
Even if you trust this government, history shows that when a government becomes empowered with the control of information, it will ultimately turn against its own citizens.
So another part of this agenda is smart meters. which are being put into your house that will literally monitor every single transaction. It'll monitor when you take the milk out of the fridge. It'll monitor how much milk you use when you take the milk out of the fridge, so that you can literally be profiled through every single action. I mean, we think we're not predictable, perhaps, and yet these smart devices have algorithms built into them for their predictive text based on your texting style. So when your predictive text comes up, it's using the history that you've created to offer alternatives on the next word you might use. Now, that's just something noddy like a smartphone. Imagine what that can be done, or what could be done with that, when it's put into the macro.
The Prime Minister, in the words of the New Zealand Herald, for the very first time admitted that his government had in fact planned a program of mass surveillance aimed at New Zealanders. And I don't make that accusation lightly. As a journalist, I understand that I can't go around making those kind of claims and maintaining my credibility unless I have the evidence to back it up, and that it's absolutely true. And in this case, I can categorically and with great confidence say that it is. I think and have been very honest about the fact that mass surveillance is a serious menace to all sorts of important political values.
When I was doing this, I would see the communications of individuals from around the world. I could be looking at a system in Japan. I could be looking at a system in Germany. I could be looking at a system in New Zealand. And what was incredible was the fact that I could see records of the communications of people around the world from every country comprehensively.
I think it's some sort of internet fraud or something.
A solution to something that isn't particularly sensible. It's like what many other solutions that we've come up with as humans that don't work.
Problems with it are somewhat over-exaggerated.
Just another get-rich-quick for a whole lot of unscrupulous miners, I think.
I think it needs further investigation. People need to realise a country needs to be run like a business. You can't get left behind in the world, and if you want to make money, you need to use your resources.
I have very negative feelings about that.
Exploitation of unconventional gas involves pumping millions of gallons of a mixture containing water, sand and chemicals at pressures of up to 15,000 pounds per square inch into the target geology to fracture the rock and release the trapped gas. This is known as hydraulic fracturing or fracking. Approximately 40% what is pumped down the well is actually recovered. Where that gas and fluids escape to cannot be totally controlled.
And this is my home up here on Crawberry Hill. It's actually has been my home since January, when it was donated to me by somebody who saw me doing a live broadcast from my tent on Barton Moss in Manchester. This is an industry, the unconventional gas industry, that has left an absolute trail of devastation wherever it has been unleashed. And although it's classified as a novel industry in the UK, there's nothing novel about it, because we have 20 years of experience of this industry from the US, from Canada, and much more recently, of course, from Australia. And the evidence of the damage, the contamination to water, soil, air, the impact on people's health is absolutely horrendous. One well that has been drilled and subjected to a full frack, and that was at Priest Hall over the other side of the country near Blackpool in 2011, and that resulted in two minor seismic events, one on April 1st and the following one on May 27th, which resulted in some 80 properties being damaged. François Hollande, the president of France, and he upheld the presidential ban on hydraulic fracturing that was imposed by his predecessor, Sarkozy. But a Texan company called Stuttbach took the French government to court and tried to get that presidential ban lifted, but the courts upheld the presidential ban. It doesn't work. The only thing that is proven is that it causes horrendous contamination of the water table, the soils, the air. It has a horrendous impact on the health of the people who live close by and those who live downwind.
And this is proven?
Absolutely. I mean, the evidence is irrefutable. Well, eventually, of course, what they will look for in the EU is what they call harmonisation. And, those countries that are opposing it right now will be forced, potentially, to allow hydraulic fracturing in their territory. The countries that are strongest against fracking right now, interestingly, are the two countries very much at the heart of the EU, and that's Germany and France. Elsewhere, there is an enormous pressure to get this industry up and running. In the US, the water is being sucked out of the Great Lakes, the Great River System, and the great aquifers under the western states. People who live in the western states are having their lives destroyed. In Australia, the Great Artesian Basin is being sucked dry at a rate 6 times greater than it can naturally replenish. Here in the UK, if this industry kicks off, within a generation, the UK will be uninhabitable. And this whole deal of demonizing Russia and using, of course, the Ukraine crisis to facilitate this. The whole Ukraine crisis is, of course, manipulated. Yeah. Totally manipulated. Yeah. It's manipulated by those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. And, the real target of this is Russia. And the reason being is that Putin has done an amazing job, of course, of gaining significant independence from the global banking establishment. And now they want to try to destroy his economy. And Russia, of course, does export gas into Eastern Europe and into Germany. The US unconventional gas industry has drilled something in the region of 500,000 wells in the last decade, and now they have a surplus of gas. So the US is desperate to find an export market for this surplus gas. And by forcing the EU to implement sanctions against Russia and stop importing gas from Russia, of course, what the US is doing is shutting off that gas market from Russia and saying, well, buy ours.
And if a country that is a trading partner of the United States does not behave according to U.S. standards, a Section 301 listing can be made, which impacts their ability to continue to work with the United States. It is a coercive form of listing which has forced many countries, including Sweden and European countries, to aggressively change their IP laws and other cultural-related laws to allow them to continue the type of access they believe they need to the U.S. market. We are in a period of moral entrepreneurship. Large corporations are criminalizing what they see as violations. For instance, infringement disputes that were heretofore civil in nature have been criminalized so that the power of the state can be directed against individuals.
It's the plan that's been actioned for the last, 200 years or so, gradually and now with increasing virulence and efficiency to control everybody, B, get rid of a lot of people that are useless eaters, shall we say, which is a term that was coined by Henry Kissinger. Total global fascism.
The one thing that everybody has in common is they need water. They need fresh water.
The fluoride that's put into drinking water is a chemical that is scrubbed out of the chimneys of the phosphate fertiliser industry. So it's a chemical that's too toxic to go into the air because it pollutes everything around it. So there's laws in every country not to let the fluoride escape out of the chimneys. So they scrub it out of the chimneys and it gets washed out into sort of like big holding ponds like you see on Erin Brockovich, and then it's carted away into tanks and put into the water supply. The reason given is that they say that it reduces dental decay, but really when people look at the scientific evidence, there's nothing to really substantiate that. It's never right to force things onto people when they don't want it. And to put something in a public water supply is a huge thing to do. In fact, you can't do anything more than put something into a water supply because it affects everybody and you have no idea how it's going to affect people, how they're responding to it, what dose they're getting.
It's not like prescribing a medication to somebody on the basis that they need it and using a specific dose. How much fluoride somebody will get through a fluoridated water supply depends on how much water they drink.
What about all the people with thyroid dysfunction these days? I mean, it's such a huge growing disease. Is that because we know now that really low levels of fluoride affect the thyroid? This is stuff about the lowering of IQ.
So I did an interview yesterday with one of the world's authorities on iodine and the thyroid, and we discussed things like IQ. Something as simple as the mother having enough iodine and iodide in her system can improve the baby's IQ substantially. If she's depleted in iodine, it reduces the IQ by about an average of 12 points.
Do you believe that fluoride in the water lowers iodine?
Fluoride in the waters can be a very dangerous problem. I understand from a dentist's perspective they see benefits for the teeth, but teeth are a minor part of the body, and there are many other ways of treating that. The body needs iodine to soak up the halides, and fluoride, bromide, and the chlorides. Chlorides are in cleaning products and toxins like the agrochemical type toxins. Bromide's in a lot of upholstery and carpets and things like that. And the fluoride, of course, in the water. And these are dangerous halides in the wrong solution.
There's something like 35 published studies from China, India and Iran saying that fluoride does lower IQ. I mean, we know that bottle-fed babies have on average, so, you know, we're not talking about every bottle-fed baby, but on average, they have about a 5-point lower IQ than breastfed babies. Now, people tend to think, oh, it's because of the omega-3s or this, that and the other that's in the breast milk. But I've wondered, is it because of what's not in the breast milk? Because no matter how much fluoride the mother has, she screens it out of the breast milk.
Children exposed to higher levels of fluoride end up with measurable declines in IQ. Not necessarily the levels to which children are exposed through water fluoridation, if it's controlled and they manage to keep the fluoride level to what is the aim in New Zealand. But the problem is once you start fluoridating water, that is one uncontrolled dose of fluoride that a child receives that can end up to be neurotoxic quite quickly. And if you're a bottle-fed baby, unfortunately, your fluoride dose can easily end up in the unsafe level if your parents are making up your formula with fluoridated water.
10 milligrams a day for 10 years or more will cause stage 2 or stage 3 of a thing called skeletal fluorosis. So you see people in India and China all bent over with this disfiguring disease, and they know that's from too much fluoride. Now, the thing is, because it's accumulative and the fluoride's accumulating in our body, what about 5 milligrams a day for 20 years, you know, or 2.5 milligrams a day for 40 years? And the thing is, nobody knows. In the first stage of skeletal fluorosis, the symptoms are exactly the same as arthritis. And at the moment, we have, you know, pandemics of arthritis in fluoridating countries. There was a good study done in about 1995 which showed that it increased ADHD. This was a good study on rats and by Phyllis Mullinux, and she found that when they gave fluoride to the rats prenatally, they became hyperactive when they were born, and when they were given it postnatally, they became like couch potatoes.
Water for health is seriously important because 80% of your body, the thoughts, the traumas and the toxins all go into the water.
Makes so much sense.
Holographically. So that means they go into the waters of every cell in the body, not just the kidney, the liver, wherever.
When they were using fluoride to actually experimentally keep people quiescent in concentration camps. And they've known it's a carcinogen. They've known that the treatments for cancer that they use, chemotherapy, are themselves carcinogenic. They've known that. They're not stupid, they're just satanic.
It's quite dangerous not to have them for children.
I haven't had my own children, and I'm quite grateful that I haven't had to make that decision.
I think you just got to go with the medical advice at the moment.
No.
come from a very healthy family of people who haven't vaccinated.
It's very important that everyone should vaccinate their babies and should vaccinate themselves.
The first one got a little bit, the first lot done had a really bad reaction, and since then none of them have been done. No.
It's a classic example of the sort of the demonisation process that can happen if you're an honest doctor, is what happened to Dr. Andrew Wakefield when he and his colleagues first presented a case series of children who had been previously developing normally and then developed regressive autism, often with bowel disease. They basically said, this is a concern. We need further research to see if there is a link between this particular vaccine and regressive autism and bowel disease. If you're a parent, you wouldn't argue with that. If you're a multinational pharmaceutical company who makes huge amounts of money from an MMR vaccine and stands to lose a lot of money if parents begin to believe that it's unsafe, you will argue. People who are familiar with Dr. Wakefield's story will know that he lost his job at the Royal Free Hospital in London. There was essentially a media beat-up against him, which accused him of fraud. And the pressure on them was so great that most of the doctors involved in that paper recanted. And Dr. Wakefield refused to recant because he said, and quite rightly, if you read the paper, I never claimed that the MMR vaccine caused autism and bowel disease. I just said that it needed to be investigated. He stuck his heels in and refused to be bullied, and consequently he lost his medical licence.
More people, especially in the areas where people don't have a lot of food, then that's fantastic.
It's not natural.
50-50. It may save the world. I agree with that.
Don't like the idea of it. I think natural is better.
Well, I do eat seedless watermelon, and I'm pretty sure that's genetically modified.
Why would we fight what created us,
GMO, genetically modified organisms. The Māori have a word for life force, the Māori of things. And GMO is a way of tampering with that Māori.
Essentially, genetic engineering is a process whereby a virus is used as a carrier medium to insert genes from one species into an unrelated species.
You're actually tampering with the genetic codes. You're splicing in genes where genes naturally and by a course of evolution are changing. Maybe perhaps, you might get what they call a sport in the area of orcharding, which is like, whoa, how did that apple get there? The tree, just by happenstance, by the very nature of its interaction with the environment, some weird quirk of nature has just done this. They've given us a new apple, but no human has tampered with it.
Species barriers, if you like, have been historically and ecologically very well defined. You don't get hybrids between tomatoes and flounders, for example.
Perhaps a gene from a fish into a tomato, or the crossing of the kingdoms, which absolutely by nature does not happen. We humans think we're intelligent and playing God.
You can patent genetically modified seeds,
and you cannot ever collect seed and save seed and grow true to type seed that comes from genetically modified food. And they even put a terminator gene in, so that guarantees it. So that means that you don't have control over your seed source, you don't have control over your food.
If you look at the funding of different studies on GMOs, you'll find that those which were financed by industry tend not to show a problem, whereas those which have been undertaken by independent scientists generally do show a problem. And one of the most famous of those was feeding rats on a genetically engineered Roundup Ready soybean. The poor things. I mean, the photos are virtually unbelievable in terms of the tumours that these rats developed.
Animals that are fed with GMO corn or GMO grain and not, they will automatically go to the organic or the non-GMO. They will leave that behind. So how does it physically affect us? It debilitates our life force. Our cells have a really hard time absorbing it because it's treated like a foreign body, which it is. And so basically it's illness causing and cancer causing. And there's evidence to back this up, but the evidence is basically, buried. Not let come to light, and that does, though people lose their jobs, so and maybe have their lives threatened. So it's very much in the interests of big business that is funding, getting funded, and getting the buy-in by pressure from farmers who are planting these things, and once they've planted they can't go back again. The soil's contaminated, and the seed source is going to keep growing, that kind of. So they are basically ruined. The suicides of farmers in India that have taken on a GMO regime at the expense of their own traditional, hundreds and hundreds of years crops is alarming.
You can connect the GMOs to the chemtrails, not a problem. You can connect it to the intensifying degrees of radiation. You can connect it to the suppression of all truthful stories that are meaningful in major media. You can connect it to Fukushima. You can connect it to the vaccines that they're putting into your little babies here.
And these are the times we're living in, those wild, tumultuous times when we as humans have really upset the equilibrium of the earth. And, as a responsive being, our Earth Mother is just wild.
You, cameraman, when we weren't filming, said you think anything that's classified as a pest is a bit sad, right? Anyway, so they call things a pest when there's too many of them, and so we're a pest, right? Cameraman?
I agree.
We're a pest.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague.
When you think in a linear, just A to B to C way, you can't think holistically. So we've lost our ability and our mental formatting as a society to think and see holistically. So it's actually how we view the world. And if you view the world as a continuum and a sort of spiral way and a cyclic way that we learn from nature by living with and observing nature, then there's no way you cannot think in an integrated way. So, we separated ourselves off to cope and function in this very fast track and very dysfunctional society. We separate ourselves from that, and so we don't have the ability to think common sense anymore.
How does that make you feel?
The word that comes to me, it's tragic.
Throughout my filming journey, I'm starting to slowly realize that the more we are out of harmony with nature, the more our minds get trapped in our matrix illusion. As our minds get sicker, so do our bodies and planet Earth.
Well, illness is a state of getting out of balance with the rest of the cosmos or the universe, and which is very well designed and architectured. It's a highly intelligent living system. And if we work in balance with that, then we experience wellness and good health. If we swim against the tide, so to say, it leads to all forms of what we call disease or illness.
Illness starts on a metaphysical level, some angst within the person deep down, feeling of shame, guilt, insecurity, not knowing their place in the world, not knowing how to stand on their own 2 feet. Then mental anguish, panic, fear, shame, guilt, uncertainty, anxiety, and then that eventually will translate into some sort of physical illness. So what we find when we treat effectively is that often as the disease heals, we get an emotional catharsis. And so because I've seen that so many times, I know in my own self that to really heal, we need to look at the spiritual aspects of a person.
A lot of my patients were coming to me with cancer, having tried all the conventional therapies and nothing having worked for them, and in a terminal state. Generally, I could give them some help. Usually, I couldn't save their lives. It's very difficult being this proverbial ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
We tend to have an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff mentality, which is extremely expensive and it's very destructive to our social systems. And it also means we're not looking after our environment properly.
It's reflected outwards.
It's reflected outwards. And it's reflected outward through relationships and breakdowns in society in various ways, and reflected outward and damaging. We damaged most of our water systems of the world. We damaged our air systems with pollution. We've destroyed most of the world's soil in the last 150 years. Our food's depleted in nutrition. Drugs through the mainstream system are enormously expensive to develop, and they tend to create a lot of side effects that in many cases don't work. They only give about 2 to 3% extra performance above a placebo effect, which is free. Things like dementia and diabetes and obesity and things like that are just going out of control, and the mainstream system doesn't know how to cope with them particularly well. A lot of the medical system